Welcome to our channel, Behind My Story. Please like, share and subscribe.
I do not panic. I simply take a breath, sit down on a stone bench nestled against some building I read about once, but can't remember the name of, and scan my cartoony tourist map for anything that looks familiar. But nothing. Give me a little credit though. Having grown up in a town with a population of just under 2,000 people, a town with a farmland and no streetlights, I am a country bumpkin who's been dropped off in a major city. I'm lucky I haven't wandered off the cliffs by now, only 2 days into my semester abroad. But culture shock is one of the main reasons I came to Dublin. So even though it is terrifying and unfamiliar, I know that living in another country for 5 months will definitely help me grow. As they say, the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having the new eyes. The weather in Ireland changes quicker than a middle school crush. By now the sky has turned a shade of grey and raindrops are beginning to spatter onto the map in my hands. I had been warned of the rain, repeatedly, before coming. It always falls softly at first, quiet as a page being turned, delicate as lace, but that's all just foreplay. When the wind comes, and it always does. It's no matter though. Studying in this city was one of my greatest desires and I knew the weather was part of the package. Dublin was meant to be experienced in the rain. The streets are full of people. I wonder if they can smell the tourist on me. I've been in Dublin for roughly 48 hours and it has yet to feel like home. Maybe it's because I haven't had time to unpack, eat a full meal, or even think. At one point, I was awake for 35 straight hours and learned that there is a little difference between delirium and insanity. To fight the chaos, I cling to the moments of serenity and hoard them like poker chips I can cash when things become too hectic. My most peaceful moment came on the plane ride here. The flight went by quickly. The wind was at our backs and the stars were ahead. As we approached, the Dublin skyline lit up like an artificial constellation. My heart was filled with promise knowing that it would soon beat along with the city's pulse. And even though I have yet to feel at peace, my heart continues to say, you will, you will, you will. The rain stops, umbrellas are tucked away, ready to be drawn when the moment calls again. I think a small part of me likes being lost. I know that if I really wanted to, I could ask any of the passers-by where I am or where I need to go. Everyone I've met so far has been so nice they'd likely offer me a ride there and a pint along the way, let alone directions. It seems strange by European standards, but the Irish people love Americans. And I mean love. They love Americans the way Americans love themselves. They want to know where I am from in the States and what it's like there and what brought me to their neck of the woods. All of it. And they really listen, absorbing every word and filtering them as willingly as if it was oxygen. There are bound to be some bad people here in Ireland because there are bad people everywhere. But with an open mind and a positive outlook, they are hard to find. Ireland as a whole is a country I've long idealized. Its postcards should be hung in the Louvre. Its culture is so rich. It is also home to my favorite writers, as well as my ancestors. I seldom contemplated my heritage before going abroad. Since I'm not of one ethnicity, I never had one predominant country to identify with. My family tree is like a European Union cocktail. Equal parts Irish, English, German, with just a splash of Dutch, shaken and not stirred. Living in Ireland briefly has changed that. I feel a part of it. I feel it in the words of the Irish people. I feel it in the quiet that hangs over the treeless forever-reaching fields. And I feel it in the river as it churns, endlessly dark and endlessly deep. So, as I sit on the same stone bench, gazing at the same animated map, I realize I'd rather be lost here in Dublin than be found anywhere else in the world.
I've been cursed, and it will haunt me for the rest of my life. It all began with a joke at first, but some jokes have serious consequences, and when this happens, your life becomes an uphill struggle. My name is Catherine. I'm 16 years old, and I live with my parents and my little sister Mara. I like music, acting, and watching action movies. I play baseball and practice ballet. I've even won a lot of prizes. I just had one problem. I like to make fun of people. It's like an addiction. I never watched what I said, nor did I care who it hurt. The kids I picked on were actually kind and gentle, but that just encouraged me even more. My friends were exactly like me. In fact, I was their leader. We walked like we owned the school. We had a classmate named Norman. He wasn't exactly what you'd call in good shape. He was quite the opposite of fit. During class breaks, my gang and I would steal his lunchbox and throw it around each other, keeping it away from him. We watched him run trying to catch us, but he'd stop halfway. The extra weight didn't help him, and he'd quickly run out of breath. Whenever he entered the classroom, we would surprise him by throwing old, musty vegetables and fruits at him. Norman tolerated our teasing. He didn't seem to mind much. But then, one day, a joke went a bit too far. We conceived an evil plan. We told him that there was going to be a photo contest, and the person who makes the funniest pose wins. Norman was so gullible that he believed us. He actually gave it some thought. Then he posed for us. We did our best not to burst out laughing while we took pictures for him. The next day, when he came to school, Norman discovered that his photo shoot pictures had been posted all over the classroom walls, and the kids were laughing, writing comments all over the place. Norman was mortified, and he looked around at his classmates' faces. They were all laughing and pointing at him. Norman started crying, and his nose started bleeding. Then he fainted. A teacher had to call an ambulance to take him to the hospital. I certainly didn't expect that to happen. We knew that Norman would get so fatigued sometimes and leave school for the rest of the day, but we didn't know that he had a medical condition, and I felt deep regret. The curse that I spoke of earlier began when a girl named Naomi joined our class as a new student. On her first day, our teacher brought her in and introduced her to us. She sat at the desk, at the very last row. I noticed that she was always looking at me in a strange way, and I wondered why. She looked at me with disdain, and I couldn't figure out why. It was my first time meeting her, after all. I avoided her, mainly because her looks made me feel uneasy, and whenever my gang wanted to make fun of her, I told them to leave her alone. I felt there was something about this girl. One day, during science class, the teacher had paired us up to do a lab experiment, and I intended to ask her about the way she looked at me. But before I could say anything, she took the initiative and surprised me by broaching the subject herself. "You will pay for what you did to Norman," she said coldly. I looked at her and asked, "How do you know Norman? And what are you talking about?" She replied, "It doesn't matter how I know. I just do." I spent the next few days thinking about her words. Afterwards, Naomi ignored me completely. No more staring, no more accusing looks. It was as if I no longer existed to her. I didn't understand her. Then came the day. We had a basketball match. It was the championship game, but I was still busy thinking about Naomi's words. During the game, I glanced at Naomi and caught her looking at me, which distracted me. One of the players from the other team suddenly bumped into me, knocking me down and causing me to land badly on one of my knees. The pain I was in. I had to withdraw from the game to be taken to the hospital. At the hospital, the doctor said that I had torn a ligament from my knee and told me that I would need a surgery and a lot of medication. So after going through the surgery, I began taking my medications. It caused me to gain weight, even though I wasn't eating very much, just vegetables and fruits. I asked the doctor about my sudden weight gain, and he told me the medications I was taking were affecting my hormonal balance, which rarely happened, but in my case, it did. He said that I would either have to endure great pain or deal with the overweight because it wasn't going to stop. So there you have it, guys. This is the curse that Naomi cast upon me, the price I had to pay for what I did to Norman. Eventually, I got well enough to take my final exams. When I arrived at school, all my friends took one look at me and started laughing. I was now their target, their prey. One of them said, "You're as large as an elephant." "I'll lose weight once I stop taking my medications," I retorted, but no one was listening. I am now living in a nightmare, and I would like to tell Norman that I'm very, very sorry for everything that I've done.
A teacher earns the respect of his students and also serves as an exemplary role model. Unfortunately, student adoration of teachers is on the wane in society now. Students owe teachers some degree of loyalty for contributing to their success in life. But what if you discovered that your teacher was on the run from the law? How would you feel? Would you want to know? Lend an ear to my story. I am Erica, and I am 17 years old. I live with my parents and my sister Felicia. My lifelong dream was to excel in all areas of life. I did well in school, and my parents noticed my stellar intellect from an early age. So they encouraged and supported my education in every way. I loved and respected all the teachers who ever taught me. I respected them for their efforts, and I took a dim view of my fellow students who didn't respect them. I even respected the teachers who taught me unimportant subjects. Though I respected all my teachers, past and present, I hadn't yet found any worthy of being a good role model for me to follow until one day a new chemistry teacher, Mr. Franklin, came to our school when our previous teacher resigned to travel abroad with her family. From the very first moment when he first entered the classroom, I was charmed by his charisma. He seemed quiet, self-confident, and venerable. But it wasn't just me. All the students were impressed by his presence. His explanations were much clearer than our previous teachers. With every passing day, I loved him more and more. I had chosen a good role model. I was amazed by his resume qualifications and his erudition and experience. I liked to chat with him on breaks to benefit from his experience, wisdom, and insights. He never indicated that I was an annoyance to him. Instead, he welcomed all my questions openly and cheerfully and shared his knowledge freely. I didn't want to let him down, so I studied very hard. He was so worldly and street smart that we nicknamed him the Thug because he seemed to know exactly how the world operated and how to get around obstacles. We figured he was either an alien from space or a thug wanted by the law. Then one day while browsing the internet, I came upon a strange coincidence. I read about an intelligent serial killer who committed brutal crimes without leaving a trace. Some witnesses had seen him and described him to the police. The resultant face sketches looked exactly like Mr. Franklin, as if he had a twin brother. The first thought that came into my mind was that this was one weird coincidence. When I went to school the next day, I showed him the news article and the sketch of the serial killer. When he saw the sketch, his features darkened. He asked me where I had read this news, and I told him that it was from a news website. He agreed that the similarity between him and the sketch was uncanny, but he seemed unconcerned, disinterested even. I was wondering if Mr. Franklin were to be the killer, what his motivation for killing might be. The next few days strengthened my suspicions when I heard about a murder in our neighborhood, which coincided with a time when Mr. Franklin was not at school. When he subsequently returned to school, he looked worried and nervous. If he were the killer, why would he risk coming back to school? I then began to consider that he might be planning to kill me because I knew his dirty little secret. I had trouble for sleeping for the next few days. Then one day after visiting one of my friends, I was walking home when I sensed that someone was following me. I began walking more quickly, and the footsteps sped up proportionately. Suddenly, I felt a touch on my shoulder. I spun around to see Mr. Franklin. He gestured for me not to speak. I nodded okay. He then told me that he has a brother named Rodriguez, who is actually the serial killer that I had shown him in the news article. He said his brother followed him everywhere to torment him and cause trouble for him. He told me that he had to leave the city, and I was very sad to hear that. He hoped that we would meet again someday. After his disappearance from school, my mind was full of questions. Was he telling the truth? Was he truly innocent? I hope I find out the answers to my questions someday.